Global Transformation Astrology, GTA, with William Stickevers.
Now, I'm going to go into one example, and then we're going to talk about what the future implies, because the Saturn-Neptune on the world point implies everything I'm discussing is going to happen to us all collectively in some way or other that's beyond my conscious understanding of how that's going to play out. But we're going to talk about Carl Jung because we have Carl Jung's chart. We have the date of when this event, his NDE event, occurred. So Carl Jung's own near-death experience, February 20th, 1944. And on February 20th, 1944 in Zurich, Jung's theories collided with direct experience. While hospitalized for a fractured leg from a fall, he suffered a massive myocardial infarction, heart attack, while in his hospital bed. So he had a fall, he had a fractured leg. He was in his, I believe, his mid to late 60s. And at that time, they didn't send you home. They were like, no, we got to, do observation here, make sure that leg heals. And he's lying in the bed for, I believe it's a few days later, and then he has this heart attack. Now, they resuscitate him, but his condition was critical for weeks, and he drifted between life and death. In fact, his wife was informed he probably won't make it. Now, during that experience, right, let's just look at the transits here. He has Pluto just crossed the sun. So Pluto crossed the sun and is coming back to his sun. So Pluto in Leo within 3+ degrees on his sun. Look at his nodes. He has the south node on his ascendant, north node on his descendant crossing there. And he just had Uranus cross over the IC. What does the IC represent? The end, the final ending, right? Where you're going to be buried. And he had Uranus cross over, Pluto cross over his sun. And when you see transiting Pluto at 7 degrees, going retrograde back onto his sun, this is a classic symbol of ego death and rebirth, bringing profound confrontation with mortality and the deeper self, the true self, not the ego, the real self behind the person you portrayed in life. And this powerful transit symbolizes the dissolution of ego boundaries and the encounter with the transpersonal dimension of psyche, exactly what Jung experienced during his NDE. The alignment suggests that the cosmic patterns reflected his inner psychological transformation, revealing the synchronistic relationship between the celestial movements and profound spiritual experience. So, in this liminal state, he entered a visionary experience very similar to modern NDE research describes. So he had an out-of-body experience. Jung felt himself rise far above his bed, rose above himself, right? He exited the hospital. He went far above the earth, seeing the planet below bathe in an ineffable blue light. So he was obviously in orbit. And he encounters an archetypal realm. He approached a colossal stone temple, suspended in space, sensing it held the full truth of his life and a reunion with his spiritual kin. And just before entering, he was pulled back by the image of his doctor, realizing his earthly work was unfinished. So his doctor, the spirit of his doctor, or the soul, approached him, pulls him back, says, no, you can't cross that line. You can't enter that temple, and that your work is incomplete. He returned reluctantly, carrying a profound grief for the peace and belonging he had just experienced. And this 1944 NDE experience / vision transformed Jung. It eradicated his fear of death, intensified his conviction that consciousness survives the body, and deepened his interest in mystical traditions, alchemy, and the symbolic cartographies of the soul. From then on, his work increasingly reflected the perspectives that life is embedded in a vast, purposeful order that transcends the physical. So, out-of-body perspective, he rose above earth, right? He had this boundary moment. You can't go past this point. He was pulled back. It's not your time. He encountered the archetypal realm. He called it the archetypal realm. People would say it's heaven. It's the other side, it's source, it's where we all come from, it's the primary domain. And then he returned reluctantly. Many NDEs return reluctantly. Homesickness for source, they're homesick. And then what happens, interestingly enough, the legacy of Jung's 1944 NDE is he has a radical value reorientation. Like many other NDE survivors, Jung emerged less interested in material concerns and more attuned to service, to love, to spiritual meaning. astrologically, this mirrors not only Pluto's transit, but the moon's movement in the 12th house. So at the time he had this NDE, that period here, the moon was, we don't have the exact time. So we know sometime in the afternoon. So I assume it was around where the moon entered the 12th house, by the way. So the moon was in the 12th house. And that movement into the 12th, along with Pluto and the sun, are archetypes of ego death and spiritual rebirth. And after 1944, Jung's writing carried new depth. He spoke more openly about the continuity of consciousness beyond death, the symbolic architecture of the afterlife, and the integration of mystical traditions into depth psychology. His NDE cemented his conviction that the psyche is an ontologically real field, meaning the psyche itself is a real field, and that death is not an end, but a transition into another mode of conscious existence. And then he writes these books, he publishes these books. Aeon was published in 1951, written in the years following his recovery. It's arguably Jung's most esoteric and symbolic work. It explores the archetype of the self, the symbolism of the Christ, the age of Pisces, and the unfolding of human consciousness in the context of the vast cosmic cycles. He also talks about that we're in transition from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. He goes into detail about that in that book. And Jung's NDE vision as a stone temple in space and a reunion with his true spiritual kin parallels the book's focus on timeless archetypal patterns and integration of the opposites. So the book's preoccupation with the end of one aeon and the birth of a new one reads like a philosophical elaboration of the threshold he approached in 1944. And then this was followed up a number of years later in his Flying Saucers, a Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Skies. In this work, Jung interprets the post-World War II UFO phenomenon as a symbol of humanity's collective psyche rather than purely a physical mystery. He links UFOs to mandalas, archetypal images of wholeness and integration, suggesting they are projections of the self, of the collective self of humanity in a time of global crisis. So he had two minds. He believed that UFOs were physically real, but they were also projections of humanity's collective psyche that was transitioning, was in a time of global crisis as we transitioned from one age, age of Pisces, to age of Aquarius. And his NDE appears to have reinforced his conviction that his psychic reality, or psychic reality in general, is as real as physical reality, which is the central thesis of the UFO book. So the cosmic visionary quality of his 1944 experience arguably predisposed him to take the UFO phenomenon seriously as a psychic event with deep symbolic meaning. And why this mattered is because if you look at Jung's pre-1944 writings, which are spiritually rich, they're more grounded in clinical psychology, and his post-1944 NDE works are more unapologetically mystical, cosmic, and concerned with humanity's destiny in the archetypal system. By the way, he makes a lot of predictions about the future of humanity in both of these books. It sounds very much like an astrologer here. It's a tough read, so you can just download the book on Scribe, and then you can have ChatGPT give you the key takeaways. And then freed him from fear of death, making him more willing to speak openly about esoteric subjects. He expanded his time horizon, where he says the scale of the millennia and flying saucers are necessary components for the transition and evolution of human consciousness in a greater cosmic context. And it deepened his integration of myth, religion, and archetypes, seeing them as keys to a collective journey. So you could see how Jung's personal, you don't really hear about this, right? I know a lot about Jung. I can hold my own with many of those Jungians in terms of Jung's development, his chart. And it wasn't until I did this type of research into NDEs that I made the connection here. I was like, wow, Jung really became a mystic, right? He really transitions into a mystic who has the understanding of, he's a medical doctor, a professor, and depth psychologist all in one, right, that transitions into a mystic with a real viable metaphysical framework.
To watch the full presentation and more like this on geopolitics, the economy, and world events from an archetypal and mundane astrological perspective, join the Global Transformation Astrology membership. Go to gta.williamstickevers.com. Become a GTA member today.